in the shadowed streets of Europe during the devastating waves of the Black Death and later plague outbreaks, a figure emerged, a haunting symbol of both hope and dread. Clad in a long cloak, gloves, and an eerie mask with a long curved beak. This was the plague doctor, the man who wore a bird beak full of herbs. But what lay behind this strange attire? What truths hid within the layers of superstition, fear, and early medical understanding that shaped this emblematic figure? To grasp the meaning behind the bird-beaked mask, we must step back to a time when the invisible enemy Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes plague was entirely unknown. Medicine was intertwined with mysticism, and the invisible forces of disease were explained through humors, miasma, and divine punishment. The prevailing theory was, miasma, the belief that diseases spread through bad air, poisonous vapors filled with corruption and decay. People believed that foul smells were not only a sign of disease, but also its vehicle. Plague doctors sought protection, not just through prayers and isolation, but by physically shielding themselves from the very air they believed carried death. Enter the mask, a grotesque but ingenious invention designed to filter the air and protect its wearer. The mask's most striking feature was the long, hollow beak, resembling that of a bird. This beak was not mere decoration or theatrical terror. It was a primitive air filter, stuffed tightly with an aromatic arsenal of herbs, spices, and flowers. Rosemary, mint, lavender, cloves, camphor, myrrh, and other fragrant botanicals found their way into the beak. These plants were chosen for their strong scents and presumed medicinal properties. Rosemary was thought to improve memory and purify the air. Mint was refreshing and antiseptic. Lavender was calming and cleansing. Cloves and camphor were believed to kill germs. Together, they formed a potent bouquet, an olfactory shield against the noxious miasmas. But this was more than herbal aromatherapy. The beak's shape, extending several inches from the face, created a small air pocket. This separation was intended to distance the doctor's nose and mouth from the patient's breath, from the putrid smells of sickness and death. In an era without germ theory, this was the closest approximation to a respirator. The mask's glass eye openings further sealed the face, while a long overcoat, gloves, and boots made of waxed leather or fabric completed the doctor's uniform, essentially a primitive form of personal protective equipment. Historical records show that the plague doctor's outfit first gained prominence in the early 17th century. One of the earliest known descriptions comes from Charles Delorme, physician to several French kings, who designed a protective costume during the Italian plague of 1619. His design included the infamous beaked mask, filled with herbs, and was intended to safeguard doctors who had to enter the sick rooms of the infected. The doctors wearing these masks were often tasked with grim duties, diagnosing patients, recording deaths, performing rudimentary treatments, and sometimes even managing quarantine measures. They were among the few brave souls venturing close to the infected, risking their lives while communities fled in terror. Yet, despite the eerie and intimidating appearance of the mask, it was far from effective against the true cause of the plague. The miasma theory, while logical given the era's limited scientific knowledge, failed to identify bacteria and fleas as the real culprits. The herbs, while aromatic and mildly antiseptic, did not create a hermetic seal. The masks did not filter microscopic pathogens, and the waxed garments could not fully prevent flea bites, which were the primary transmission vector. Still, the psychological power of the mask and outfit cannot be understated. To frighten populations, the plague doctor was both a symbol of authority and a grim reminder of mortality. The mask's bird-like beak gave the doctor an unsettling, almost otherworldly presence. Some believed the costume itself might repel evil spirits or disease due to its odd and unusual form. There are stories and legends of plague doctors becoming almost spectral figures in the night, wandering through plague-ridden streets, their footsteps echoing in the silence. In some towns, their arrival was greeted with a mixture of hope and horror. To families afflicted by the plague, the doctor's presence was a double-edged sword, a sign that help might come, but also a portent of death. One particularly compelling aspect of the beak was the way it symbolized humanity's struggle against the unseen. With no microscopes powerful enough to reveal bacteria, no vaccines or antibiotics to fight infections, people turned to what they knew nature's scents and symbolic protections. The herbs in the beak, fragrant and alive, were a last desperate attempt to impose order and defense against chaos and death. Modern scientific analysis has found that some of the herbs stuffed into the masks had mild antibacterial and insect properties. Lavender and rosemary, for example, can deter certain insects, possibly reducing flea bites to a small degree. Cloves and camphor also have antimicrobial compounds. However, the overall effectiveness was minimal in the face of a rampant pandemic. Beyond the scientific, the plague doctor's mask became a cultural icon embedded deeply into the collective memory. It has inspired countless depictions in art, literature, and popular culture. The stark image of the masked Dr. Bothila and harbinger reflects the paradox of medicine in a time when science and superstition were inseparably intertwined. It is fascinating to consider how the plague doctor's costume represented an early intersection of medical practice and protective gear. Centuries before modern hazmat suits, before N95 masks and gloves, this outfit was humanity's first step toward understanding contagion and the need for protection against airborne threats. In the end, the man who wore a bird beak full of herbs was more than a historical curiosity. He was a symbol of humanity's enduring fight against disease and death, a mixture of knowledge and ignorance, hope and fear, though his mask could not save him from the plague's grasp. His image endures as a haunting reminder of our ancestors' attempts to wrest control from the invisible forces that shape their world. So, next time you see that iconic bird-beaked mask, remember, it was not just a costume, but an earnest, if flawed, expression of survival, a desperate blend of nature's fragrances, designed to shield a healer's breath from the very air that threatened to end his life. The streets that smelled like burnt feathers in the shadow of the Black Death as the plague tore through cities and villages across Europe. People sought desperately for ways to protect themselves from the invisible terror that killed by the thousands. Science was yet unborn, and medical understanding was a fragile, flickering candle in a vast sea of darkness and fear. Among the many strange and desperate measures, one practiced lingered in the air like a grim perfume that burning, of feathers, old shoes, and animal dung in public squares. This was not mere superstition, but a deeply ingrained ritual born of the belief that foul smells carried disease, and that smoke, by contrast, could purify the poisoned air and stop the plague from spreading. The medieval mind saw illness as a corruption of the humors, a poison that seeped through the air, corrupting not just bodies, but the very atmosphere. Miasma theory, the idea that diseases were caused by bad air, was the dominant explanation for centuries. In this context, the thick smoke that rose from heaps of burning refuse was a weapon against invisible death itself. Feathers, once soft and gentle, became fuel for purification fires. Old shoes, soaked in sweat and worn from endless walking, were thrown into the flames, along with piles of dung, the stinking waste of animals that populated the streets. These burning piles were meant to cleanse the air of pestilence, to banish the unseen miasma that carried sickness. To the people living through those days, the burning was a sacred and fearful act. The skies above cities like London, Paris, and Florence would darken with acrid smoke, curling like spectral fingers through narrow streets and over crumbling rooftops. The smoke was thick and choking, a bitter reminder of the plague's presence. Yet paradoxically, it brought a strange comforter, visible sign that the community was fighting back against death itself. Chroniclers of the time described the streets that smelled like burnt feathers and dung, the air heavy with the scent of smoldering refuse. The act of burning was not random. It was organized, communal, and ritualistic. Town officials would order the collection of waste and refuse, commanding citizens to gather their unwanted, rotting items. Markets and public squares became pyres of desperation. The fires burned day and night, a continuous haze meant to shield the populace from the deadly disease that seemed to lurk in every breath. But why feathers? Feathers were abundant from poultry raised in the city and countryside, and were thought to have a special property. Their burning produced a distinct, acrid smoke believed to be particularly effective at cleansing. Old shoes, too, were symbolic relics of human movement and were carriers of sweat, dirt, and disease in the minds of the medieval people. Burning them was an act of destroying potential carriers of contagion. Dung, vile and repugnant, was the ultimate source of foul odor and decay, so it was burned to expel the poison from the air and earth. Despite the smell, despite the choking smoke, the people accepted these fires as a necessary evil. They believed that the stench of burning waste was less deadly than the putrid airs of the plague itself. The scent of burnt feathers and dung was, paradoxically, a sign of hope, of resistance, and of communal survival. It was an attempt to wrest control from the chaos of disease, to create order from death's chaos. Modern science tells us that burning feathers and dung likely had little to no effect on the spread of plague, which was transmitted primarily by fleas carried on rats. The miasma theory, though incorrect in its cause, shaped medieval public health measures, many of which had unintended consequences. The smoke may have temporarily cleared some insects from the area or masked the smell of decay, but it certainly did not stop the bacterium Yersinia pestis from spreading. Yet, the story of these burning pyres is more than a tale of misguided efforts. It reveals the profound human need to act, to fight, and to find meaning even in the darkest times. In the absence of knowledge, communities turned to ritual, to visible action, to the tangible signs of battle against an unseen enemy. These fires were a communal cry into the night, a desperate attempt to cleanse not just the air, but the very soul of a city racked by death. The smoke rising from burning feathers, old shoes, and dung was a symbol of fear, of hope, of resistance, and ultimately of humanity's resilience in the face of overwhelming terror. As the centuries passed and medical knowledge advanced, these rituals faded into the dusty pages of history, replaced by germ theory and antiseptics. But the memory of streets that once smelled like burnt feathers and dung remains, a haunting testament to the ways people fought the plague. With the weapons they had: fire, smoke, and unyielding will. The rings that held secret spices, imagine a world gripped by fear. A world where invisible enemies lurk in every breath, every corner, every shadow. The air itself feels poisoned, a lethal fog that carries death unseen. This was Europe during the great waves of plague in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, when the Black Death and recurring pestilences claimed millions of lives. People clung desperately to whatever means they could find to protect themselves, and in the hands of the wealthy and noble classes, one unusual object came to symbolize both fear and hope: the pomander ring. Pomanders were small containers filled with aromatic substances, herbs, spices, resins, believed to have the power to purify the air, cleanse the wearer's breath, and ward off the deadly miasma thought to cause disease. Among the most prized were rings designed specifically to be worn on the finger, discreet yet constant companions to the elite, who would sniff their contents repeatedly, seeking protection from the invisible poison that surrounded them. The concept of pomanders dates back to medieval times, but rose to prominence during the 14th century plague outbreaks. It was widely believed that bad air, or miasma, caused sickness, and foul smells were considered carriers of disease. The solution seemed simple: fill your personal space with sweet, pungent scents, powerful enough to overpower and cleanse the harmful mists. But not just any scent would do. Spices like cloves, ambergris, myrrh, frankincense, cinnamon, and musk were valued not only for their rarity and exoticism, but for their supposed medicinal properties. Cloves, in particular, held a special place in this olfactory arsenal. Native to the Maluku Islands in Indonesia, cloves were extraordinarily expensive and treasured in Europe, where spices were seen as luxury goods and signs of status. Their sharp, warm aroma was thought to purify and protect. Ambergris, a mysterious, waxy substance produced in the digestive systems of sperm whales, was even more rare and valuable. It emitted a musky scent that lingered, adding an enigmatic layer to the pomander's fragrance and heightening its perceived power. These pomander rings were crafted by skilled artisans, often from precious metals like gold or silver. They were finely perforated to allow the fragrance to escape slowly, releasing waves of aromatic smoke. Some were ornately decorated, shaped into flowers or geometric patterns, making them not only tools of survival, but exquisite pieces of jewelry that conveyed wealth and refinement. For the wearer, the ritual of bringing the ring close to the nose and inhaling the scent became a protective habit. A small act of control in a time when so much felt terrifyingly out of control. But the pomander ring was more than just a fashion statement or a primitive medical device. It represented a complex intersection of science, superstition, commerce, and social signaling. In a time when germ theory was centuries away, and doctors could do little more than observe the horror, these rings offered a psychological shield. The act of sniffing the cloves, or ambergris, was an attempt to assert dominion over the invisible enemy, a sensory battle against fear and death. Historical records and art reveal glimpses of these rings in use. Portraits from the late 15th and 16th centuries sometimes depict nobles with pomander rings prominently displayed or held near their faces. Diaries and letters mention the constant use of scented items, and inventories of wealthy estates list pomanders alongside other valuables. The demand for spices soared, fueling maritime expeditions and the beginnings of global trade routes that connected Europe to Asia and beyond, changing the world forever. Yet beneath the surface of elegance and mystery lay an uncomfortable truth. The pomander ring was ultimately powerless against the plague's real cause: bacteria and fleas on rats. Though no one knew it then, the reliance on scent and air purification delayed understanding and effective medical responses, contributing to centuries of misunderstanding about disease transmission. Still, the rings remain a potent symbol of humanity's eternal struggle to find hope amid despair, to find safety in a world of unseen dangers. From another angle, the pomander rings also expose the profound inequalities of the time. While nobles could afford such luxurious talismans, common folk had little recourse but to endure, often succumbing in staggering numbers. Not only tools of protection, but markers of social division. Reminders that survival often hinged on wealth and access. In some ways, the pomander rings anticipated modern personal protective measures, the masks, sanitizers, and perfumes we carry today. The human desire to control one's immediate environment through scent and barrier remains a constant. The pomander ring, with its secret-filled core, was a tangible manifestation of that primal impulse. So next time you see an image of a delicate ring, intricately perforated, whispering with the scent of cloves or ambergris, remember the centuries of history it carries, the fear it embodied, the hope it inspired, the social currents it symbolized. The rings that held secret spices were more than jewelry. They were silent witnesses to a time when the breath you took could mean life or death. The herbs hung on every door during the darkest hours of medieval Europe, when plague swept through villages and cities with merciless fury. People grasped desperately for any shield against the invisible enemy. In those times, science, as we know, it was but a distant dream, and superstition, folklore, and ancient herbal wisdom became the bulwarks against death. One of the most striking and haunting practices was the simple yet potent act of hanging herbs bundles of garlic, rue, and wormwood in every door and window. This act was not merely decoration. It was a ritual laden with meaning, steeped in centuries of belief, fear, and hope. Imagine a medieval street in the throes of plague. Houses stand close together, their timber frames darkened by age. Windows shuttered tight. The air is thick not just with the odors of daily life, but with the stench of death and decay. People whisper of corrupted winds, invisible miasmas carrying sickness like a poisoned breath. They believe these corrupted winds are the true carriers of plague, an evil force that can be pushed back, tamed, or warded off. Herbs such as garlic, rue, and wormwood were chosen deliberately. Garlic, with its pungent aroma and fierce reputation, was believed to be a powerful protector. Its strong smell was thought to drive away evil spirits and harmful influences, acting almost like a natural barrier. Ancient texts from Hippocrates to Pliny the Elder praised garlic's medicinal virtues, linking it to strength and purification. It was more than a culinary staple. It was a talisman against pestilence. Rue, a bitter herb with a sharp scent, was equally valued, known as the herb of grace. Rue had a long-standing symbolic association with protection and purification. It was thought to dispel malevolent forces and cleanse the air around a home. In medieval herbals, rue was recommended for a variety of ailments, from digestion to warding off the evil eye. The fact that its fragrance lingered in doorways was a constant reminder of a household's vigilance and refusal to surrender to disease. Wormwood, perhaps the most bitter of these herbs, carried its own potent symbolism. Historically connected with both medicine and magic, wormwood was believed to have strong purifying properties. It was famously associated with protection against witchcraft and poison. Its presence on a home was a sign of spiritual as well as physical defense, and emblem of resistance against the invisible forces threatening life itself. Together, these herbs formed a triad of defense. Hanging bundles over doors and windows was a tactile, visible way to combat the unseen. The ritual acted as a form of psychological armor, reassuring the inhabitants that they were doing all they could to stay safe. In an era when helplessness could easily breed despair, these herbs became symbols of hope and resilience. This practice also intersected with broader medieval understandings of health and illness. The dominant medical theory of the time was the miasma theory, the belief that diseases were spread through noxious, corrupted air. Unlike modern germ theory, this concept focused on the environment and its invisible vapors. To keep the miasma at bay, people sought to purify the air with pleasant or sharp smells, in the belief that good odors could cleanse and bad odors could infect. The use of herbs in this way was a primitive form of aromatherapy. Centuries before science would catch up. In fact, these herbs often contained compounds with antibacterial and insect repellent properties. While medieval people could not understand microbes, their empirical knowledge of herbs sometimes gave them an edge in limiting the spread of disease. Garlic, for instance, contains allicin, known today for its antimicrobial effects. Rue and wormwood also have bioactive compounds. Whether or not these herbs truly stopped the plague, they certainly made the air less hospitable to pests, like fleas, which were actual vectors of the disease. But the symbolic power of these herbs cannot be overstated. In the face of overwhelming tragedy, people needed tangible ways to assert control. Hanging herbs was an act of defiance against the chaos of death. It was a declaration that the household was protected, sanctified, and watched over. These bundles were also social signals. Neighbors would recognize a home taking precautions, and the act built a communal front against the plague. Historical records and archaeological finds support this widespread practice. Chroniclers of the time describe how people turned to herbs during epidemics. Some wills and inventories list stocks of rue and garlic reserved specifically for plague times. Paintings and manuscripts depict houses adorned with fragrant bundles. And folk traditions passed down through generations kept these customs alive long after the worst of the pandemics faded. However, the story of these herbs also carries a tragic undertone. For every bundle hung, there was a family battling fear, isolation, and the heartbreaking loss of loved ones. The herbs were not magical shields, but symbols of a desperate hope, a fragile thread clinging to survival. Their scent carried memories of prayers whispered in darkened rooms, the quiet sobs of those left behind, and the unyielding human will to endure. As we look back now, with centuries of scientific knowledge behind us, the image of garlic, rue, and wormwood hanging from weathered doors invites a profound reflection. It reminds us of the interplay between belief and biology, between superstition and science, between fear and courage. These herbs were more than plants. They were anchors in a turbulent sea of uncertainty. The legacy of hanging herbs is a testament to the resilience of human culture. It reflects an ancient wisdom, one that sees nature not only as a provider of sustenance, but as a guardian against darkness. In those times, when the invisible enemy could strike without warning, when death seemed to lurk in every breath, the simple act of hanging fragrant bundles was a ritual of protection, a beacon of hope, and a powerful statement of survival. So, next time you encounter stories of the Black Death or medieval plagues, remember the herbs hung on every door. They tell a story of humanity's struggle to make sense of suffering, to find light in shadow, and to believe in the power of nature's gifts of N when all else seemed lost. The bonfires lit to fight invisible poison in the darkest chapters of human history. When the shadow of the plague fell over great cities like London and Paris, people faced an enemy they could neither see nor understand. This enemy was not a single foe, but a mysterious, invisible poison, an unseen miasma that seemed to infect the very air they breathed. Across these afflicted cities, amidst panic and desperation, a haunting ritual took hold: the lighting of massive bonfires in the streets, not to warm the bones against cold nights, but to purify the air itself. These fires blazed fiercely, towering flames consuming heaps of wood, brush, and even more unsettling materials, and other burning refuse. The goal was clear, though rooted in the limited medical understanding of the time: destroy the invisible poison that carried the plague and protect the living from a creeping, unseen death. To truly grasp why these fires were lit, one must journey back to the medieval and early modern understanding of disease. Long before germ theory, before the microscope revealed the truth of bacteria and viruses, humanity wrestled with the concept of illness as a curse or a corruption of the air itself. The dominant medical theory was miasma, the belief that diseases spread through bad air, a foul-smelling vapor emanating from decay and filth. This noxious air was thought to invade the body's delicate humors, unbalancing health and triggering fever, boils, and death. In the context of the Black Death and recurrent plague outbreaks, this belief transformed into a desperate fight against the very atmosphere. Cities like London and Paris were dense and unsanitary, their narrow streets choked with the detritus of daily life and death. Garbage, human waste, animal carcasses, and industrial refuse clogged the alleys, producing odors so foul they seemed almost tangible. With the arrival of the plague, every stench was perceived as a weapon, every sickly breath a potential death sentence. The massive bonfires served as both symbolic and practical defenses against this invisible enemy. Flames consumed waste and filth, producing dense, acrid smoke thought to cleanse the air, burning away the miasma that carried disease. Records from the 14th and 17th centuries describe how city authorities mandated the lighting of these fires. In London, during the Great Plague of 1665, for example, official proclamations ordered citizens to burn large fires in public places, and even in their homes to fumigate and purify. Streets were transformed into smoky labyrinths, the air thick, with choking fumes that masked the rotting odors beneath. Contemporary eyewitness accounts reveal a city enveloped in haze, where the smoke became a strange companion to the terror of sickness. People believed that these bonfires formed a barrier between them and the deadly pestilence, a fiery shield to ward off the invisible poison lurking in the shadows. Yet these fires carried a dual symbolism, both of hope and of human vulnerability. They were a defiant gesture of resistance against a foe too elusive to combat directly. The sight of the flames was a psychological salve, a sign that something was being done in the face of overwhelming despair. However, the very need for such desperate measures underscored the limits of contemporary science and the terrifying uncertainty that gripped entire populations. The fire was a dance with death itself, both a purifier and a reminder of the plague's relentless presence. From a practical standpoint, these bonfires had mixed effects. While they did little to kill the plague bacteria directly, the act of burning refuse helped reduce the sources of foul odors and cleaned up some of the physical filth in the streets. In some cases, the fires might have incidentally reduced rat populations or their fleece, known later to be the true carriers of the plague. However, the thick smoke also had unintended consequences. It worsened breathing conditions for many, and the fires could spread danger through accidental blazes. In already fragile wooden cities, still, the bonfires remained a staple of plague response for decades, their flames flickering at the edges of despair and survival. The image of entire city streets lit by these furious fires is both haunting and mesmerizing. At night, the glow of the bonfires painted eerie shadows on the stone walls and cobblestones, flickering over the faces of fearful citizens. The smoke curled into the sky, blurring stars and drowning the moonlight. In that smoke, people sought deliverance, a cleansing flame that could burn away death itself. The bonfires were a desperate incantation against the unseen, a fiery ritual to hold back a darkness that science could not yet explain. Looking back, these bonfires reveal much about humanity's instinct to fight against the unknown, to impose order and hope where chaos reigns. They were the embodiment of a primal struggle, light against darkness, fire against poison, against death, The great street bonfires of plague-ridden cities stand as historical monuments, not only to a terrifying disease, but to the courage, fear, and resilience of those who lived through it, though their knowledge was imperfect. Their will to survive burned bright flames, roaring against an invisible enemy that stalked the streets. In understanding the bonfires, we glimpse a world suspended between myth and reality, where smoke was medicine, fire was protection, and the very air was a battlefield. It is a story of humanity's earliest attempts to wrest control over death itself, to turn back an invisible poison with the elemental power of flame. And in that story, there is a lesson about the limits of knowledge, the depths of fear, and the unyielding human desire to fight on, even when the enemy cannot be seen. The orange stuck with cloves against death in the tumultuous streets of medieval Europe, where fear and death clung to every corner. People sought any means to protect themselves from the invisible menace known as the plague. With no knowledge of bacteria or how diseases truly spread, society clung to theories born of observation, superstition, and desperate hope. Among the many curious and poignant customs that emerged during these dark times was the carrying of what came to be known as plague oranges, citrus fruits studded with cloves, kept close in handkerchiefs or pockets, sniffed repeatedly, as personal talismans against death itself. To understand this strange yet intimate ritual, we must first immerse ourselves in the medieval worldview. The plague was understood primarily through the lens of miasma theory, the belief that disease was borne by foul, poisonous air, the very breath of death itself. The noxious smells of decay, rot, and human suffering were thought to carry the pestilence, infecting lungs and souls alike. Thus, to guard oneself, medieval people believed it was crucial to keep bad smells at bay and to breathe clean, fragrant air as a shield. It was in this climate of fear and bewilderment that the humble orange became a symbol of protection. Imported from southern lands, oranges were exotic and precious. Their bright, vibrant skins and zesty scent standing in stark contrast to the pervasive stench of plague-ravaged towns. By piercing these precious fruits with clovesin, other aromatic spice prized for its pungent, spicy aroma, people crafted a portable fortress of scent. A handheld purifier to carry through markets, crowded streets, and homes touched by sickness. The process of making a plague orange was itself ritualistic. With care, dozens of small holes would be pricked into the orange's skin, each studded with a clove, embedding the fruit with a constellation of fragrant spikes. The citrus oils mingled with the warm, spicy perfume of the cloves, releasing a sharp, cleansing aroma designed to overwhelm the putrid odors that lurked nearby. This fusion of scents was believed to not only mask the stench, but actively combat the miasma, the corrupt air that carried the plague. Medieval writings and personal accounts frequently mention the use of such aromatic balls or pomanders, sometimes carried in ornate cases or simple cloth bags. People would raise these fragrant spheres to their noses, inhaling deeply, hoping the sweet and spicy bouquet would purify the air they breathed, stave off infection, and in some cases, even uplift the spirits oppressed by despair. The plague? Orange became a small beacon of hope in a world darkened by death. The choice of oranges and cloves was not arbitrary. Oranges, rich in vitamin C, even unknowingly, carried a refreshing scent that was far removed from the rank smells of illness and decay. Cloves, used since ancient times for their medicinal properties, were thought to have antiseptic qualities. While medieval science lacked the tools to understand germs or infection, they recognized that strong smells often accompanied cleanliness or healing herbs, and thus attributed protective power to them. Carrying a plague orange was more than a mere superstition. It was a tactile act of defiance against the overwhelming tide of disease. In crowded marketplaces where bodies pressed close and coughing echoed in narrow alleys, these fragrant spheres offered a measure of control, a way for individuals to claim agency over their own breath and bodies. The simple act of sniffing the clove-studded orange was a ritual of survival, a momentary respite from the invisible horror surrounding them. Yet, beyond the physical and medicinal beliefs, the plague orange also carried symbolic weight. The bright color of the orange stood in stark opposition to the grays and browns of a city gripped by sickness. It was a small fragment of life and vitality, a reminder of nature's resilience amidst ruin. The cloves, sharp and penetrating, symbolized a protective barrier, a defense that could pierce through the darkness of despair. Historically, pomanders and similar fragrant balls evolved in Europe from the Middle Ages onward, later becoming fashionable in the Renaissance courts, but their origin as practical protective talismans during plague times reveals how deeply intertwined medicine and magic once were. People lived in a world where science had yet to illuminate the microscopic enemies and where every breath could bring either life or death. While modern science shows that oranges and cloves could not stop the plague bacteria transmitted by fleas and rodents, there is some truth in the psychological power of these rituals. The act of carrying and sniffing the plague, orange offered comfort, a sense of preparedness, and the illusion of safety essential elements in the struggle to endure an unimaginable catastrophe. The legacy of the plague, orange endures in cultural memory as a poignant reminder of humanity's earliest efforts to cope with the unknown. It is a symbol of resilience in the face of terror, an aromatic talisman against the void, and a testament to the creativity born of fear and hope. In every clove embedded into a citrus orb lies a story of desperation, ingenuity, and the timeless human desire to breathe freely, even when shadowed by death. So, when you imagine the medieval city streets filled with the cries of the sick and the tolling of bells for the dead, picture also the quiet determination of those clutching their plague oranges close, raising them to their noses and inhaling, deeply finding, in the fragrant spike-studded sphere, a fleeting shield against the Grim Reaper's silent approach. The perfumed gloves that could save a life in the grand courts and opulent salons of medieval and Renaissance Europe, where power and wealth converged beneath gilded chandeliers, a peculiar accessory held both fashion and superstition tightly. Intertwined, the perfumed glove. Aristocrats, amidst the shadow of relentless plague outbreaks, adorned their hands not just for elegance, but for survival. These gloves, soaked meticulously in mixtures of vinegar, rosewater, and other fragrant liquids, were believed to form an invisible shield against the invisible enemy lurking in every handshake and exchanged coin. The idea was simple, yet profound. If disease rode the air, if sickness was carried in foul odors, then perhaps the antidote lay in scent itself. Vinegar, known for its pungent sharpness and cleansing properties, mingled with the delicate perfume of roses and other botanicals, creating a sensory armor that could ward off contagion. To wear these gloves was to assert control in a world unraveling into chaos, to turn fear into fashion, and to declare oneself protected against the merciless plague. But why gloves? The hands are the instruments of human connection, the grasp of greeting, the passing of coins, the touch of alliance and trust. In a time before germ theory and antiseptics, the aristocracy understood only the language of smells and symbols. Hands that exchanged money, touched faces, or clasped in greeting were potential vectors of death. To shield them was to build a fortress at the front line of social interaction. Perfumed gloves became a crucial part of this defense. Sharp acidity was believed to cleanse and repel. Rosewater, distilled from thousands of fragrant petals, was more than a scent. It was a talisman, a distilled essence of purity and life. The combination, carefully prepared by apothecaries and glove makers, soaked into soft leather, created a lingering aroma that masked the stench of decay and disease that haunted the streets. Wearing such gloves was both a statement and a safeguard. Aristocrats flaunted their scented gloves as symbols of refinement and power, while also attempting to keep the plague's miasma at bay. Coins exchanged in these gloved hands were considered less likely to carry poison. When two nobles greeted each other, their gloved palms whispered a silent pact: "I protect myself, and I respect the invisible dangers we all face." Yet these gloves were far from foolproof. The plague bacteria, spread primarily by fleas and rats, did not heed the scent of roses or the acidity of vinegar. Still, the psychological comfort they offered was profound. The gloves allowed aristocrats a sense of control, a way to participate in society's rituals without surrendering entirely to fear. The preparation of these gloves was itself a delicate art. Vinegar, often combined with aromatic herbs like lavender, rosemary, and myrrh, was applied repeatedly to the leather, saturating it deeply. Rosewater, prized and expensive, added a layer of floral elegance, Some glove makers even infused their products with exotic spices and resins, drawing on ancient traditions of purification and healing. These gloves became coveted luxury items, blending fashion, folklore, and fatal necessity. Stories from the period tell of nobles who would not greet anyone without their perfumed gloves, their scented hands a mark of status and protection. Coins were carefully handled, touched only by the gloved fingertips, as if to prevent the invisible poison from leaping across the palm. In some cases, gloves were exchanged or gifted as tokens of goodwill and shared survival. In truth, the perfumed gloves reveal much about a world desperate to find meaning and safety amid the plague's carnage. They embody the intersection of fear and hope, superstition and science, fashion and function. Though we now understand the real causes of plague transmission, these gloves remind us of the human spirit's resilience, the need to create barriers, physical or symbolic, against forces beyond comprehension. The scent of rosewater and vinegar still lingers in the stories of those who lived through Europe's darkest hours. It is a fragrant echo of a time when the line between beauty and survival was as thin as the delicate leather gloves themselves. To wear them was to believe in protection, to grasp at life with elegance, and to hold back death if only by the power of scent. The woman who fainted from too much lavender in a time when death seemed to drift invisibly on the air, when pestilence stalked the streets, and the very breath one took could bring ruin. People grasped at every desperate measure to protect themselves. The plague was an unseen terror, a shadow that crept into homes and castles alike, sparing neither pauper nor prince. Among the many rituals born from fear and hope was the heavy reliance on perfumes, powerful, pungent, overwhelming, scents believed to cleanse the air and shield the wearer from the invisible enemy. But what happens when protection becomes peril itself? One striking and tragic example emerges from the annals of history. A noblewoman who, in her desperate bid to guard against the invisible killer, saturated herself and her environment with lavender, so much lavender in fact, that she fainted, overwhelmed by the very fragrance she believed would save her life. Lavender, with its sweet floral aroma, has long been prized across cultures for its calming, medicinal, and protective properties. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, lavender was associated not only with cleanliness, but with spiritual purification. It was said to ward off evil spirits and disease, and it became a staple in the plague-era arsenal of aromatic herbs. Nobles and commoners alike used it, carrying sachets, sprinkling it in rooms, and draping their garments with the scent. But in the suffocating panic of plague times, some went beyond gentle use. Some nobles soaked their clothing in lavender-infused oils and waters, hoping to create an invisible barrier of scent that would repel disease. Others filled their chambers with lavender bundles or sprayed the air with distilled essences, turning entire rooms into dense clouds of perfume. The noblewoman in question, whose identity is lost to history but whose story survives as a cautionary tale, reportedly sealed herself in a room soaked with lavender oil. She enveloped herself in layers of lavender-scented fabric, confident that the overpowering aroma would cleanse the air and keep her safe from the miasma believed to carry the plague. But rather than protection, the unrelenting intensity of the fragrance had a toxic effect. Overcome by the overpowering scent, she fainted, a dramatic, visceral reminder that even the remedies born of hope can sometimes become instruments of harm. This event underscores the delicate balance between perception and reality in the medieval medical worldview. At the time, the dominant theory of disease was miasma, the idea that illness was caused by bad air, foul smells, and corruption in the atmosphere. Sweet and strong scents were thought to counteract these poisons. Lavender, with its clean and fresh aroma, was considered one of the most effective weapons in this fight. But the knowledge of how essential oils and volatile compounds affect the body was limited. In high concentrations, such substances can cause headaches, dizziness, respiratory distress, and even fainting. What this noblewoman's experience reveals is a tragic paradox. The line between cure and poison was thin and easily crossed. Without understanding dosage or toxicity, desperate individuals sometimes subjected themselves to treatments as dangerous as the diseases they sought to avoid. It is a reminder that medical science was still in its infancy, entwined with superstition, limited by incomplete knowledge. and shaped by cultural beliefs that could be as harmful as the plague itself. Furthermore, this story speaks to the emotional landscape of plague-stricken Europe, a world steeped in fear, isolation, and uncertainty. The act of sealing oneself away in a perfumed room was not only a physical defense, but a psychological one. The scent of lavender was soothing, evoking calm and cleanliness amid chaos. Yet that very attempt to create sanctuary turned suffocating, a metaphor for the claustrophobia and desperation felt by those trapped between hope and despair. Lavender's story did not end with this noblewoman's fainting episode. Across the centuries, lavender remained a cherished herb, evolving from medieval superstition to modern aromatherapy. Its calming effects on the nervous system are now backed by science. Yet the lesson of excess remains. The fainting noblewoman's tale is a cautionary echo from the past, warning that even the gentlest remedies can overwhelm when misused. In the broader context of plague history, this incident exemplifies the lengths to which people went to confront an invisible enemy. From pomander rings filled with cloves to chambers thick with smoke or perfume, humanity's fight against disease has always involved both science and symbolism, action and ritual. The noblewoman's lavender-saturated isolation is but one poignant vignette in this vast tapestry of struggle. Today, as we understand the true causes of infection and possess powerful tools to combat disease, it's easy to look back and judge these past practices as misguided, but they reflect a universal truth. In moments of crisis, when faced with the unknown, humans cling fiercely to hope and protection, even when that means fumbling in the dark. The fainting noblewoman reminds us that fear can both inspire innovation and lead to unintended consequences. So, when you smell lavender's gentle scent, think of that noblewoman sealed away in her perfumed chamber, a figure frozen in time, caught between the desperation of her era and the eternal human quest to find safety against unseen dangers. Her story lingers, carried on the fragrant breeze, a silent whisper from history about the fragile line between healing and harm. The vinegar sponge kept under the nose in the terrifying days when the plague ravaged towns and cities. People clung to any fragment of hope that might shield them from the invisible threat lurking in the air. Among these desperate defenses, one of the most fascinating and widespread was the use of the four thieves vinegar, a pungent concoction soaked into sponges or cloths and kept constantly under the nose. This sour, sharp-smelling mixture was believed to create an invisible barrier against the poisonous air, the miasma thought to carry the deadly pestilence. The name itself, for thieves' vinegar, hints at a deeper story woven into folklore and fear. According to legend, for thieves or bandits who robbed the sick during plague outbreaks managed to avoid infection by using this very vinegar. Their secret recipe was said to protect them as they moved through plague-ridden houses, plundering valuables while others fell ill and died. This tale became a powerful symbol of cunning and survival, passed from mouth to mouth, recorded in apothecary manuals, and embraced by the terrified public. The mixture was traditionally made from a base of vinegar, infused with a blend of aromatic and medicinal herbs and spices such as rosemary, sage, lavender, garlic, and sometimes cloves, or wormwood. Vinegar itself, already known for its preservative and cleansing properties, was transformed into a potent elixir by steeping it with these botanicals. The final product was sour, sharp, and strongly fragrant, a smell that could pierce through the heavy, foul air that people believed was saturated with deadly corruption. The practice of inhaling this vinegar-soaked sponge was based on the dominant medical theory of the time, the miasma theory. This idea held that disease spread through poisonous vapors or bad air, corrupted by decay, filth, and death. To combat this, people sought to fill their lungs with good air, or scents believed to purify and protect. The vinegar sponge became a mobile fortress, a personal purifier that warded off the invisible poison. Plague doctors famously carried these sponges or cloths inside their iconic beak-shaped masks, continuously breathing through the fragrant material to defend themselves as they treated the sick. This practice was not mere superstition, it was an attempt to harness known natural remedies in the face of an unknowable enemy. The pungent herbal aromas, coupled with the vinegar's acidity, might have offered some degree of protection against airborne pathogens, or at least helped mask the overwhelming stench of decay. Scientific studies today revealed that many herbs used in Four Thieves vinegar have antimicrobial properties. Rosemary and sage contain compounds that can inhibit bacteria and fungi, while garlic's allicin is well known for its antibacterial effects. Vinegar, too, has been used historically as a disinfectant. While these effects wouldn't have stopped the fleas and rats responsible for spreading the plague, inhaling the vinegar and herbs might have reduced secondary infections or offered psychological comfort amid chaos. The ritual of keeping the vinegar sponge under the nose was intensely symbolic. It represented an active fight against death, a small act of control in a world unraveling under the weight of disease. For those who inhaled its sour breath, it was a tangible reminder that they were fighting back, that they had a weapon, however imperfect, against the creeping darkness. Moreover, the use of the Four Thieves vinegar illustrates the blending of folklore, herbal medicine, and early public health practices. In a time before germ theory, when the cause of the plague was unknown and invisible, people used the tools at their disposal, plants, vinegar, and scent, to carve out a sense of safety. This mix of science and superstition is a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. Over centuries, the legend of the Four Thieves vinegar survived beyond the plague years. It became a part of folk medicine, revered for its cleansing qualities and its storied past. Apothecaries sold variations of the recipe, and it remains a curious reminder of how our ancestors confronted disease with the resources nature provided and the stories they wove to make sense of suffering. Reflecting on this ancient practice, today we see more than just a strange medieval remedy. We see a window into a time of fear and hope, where every breath was a battleground and every scent a shield. The vinegar sponge kept under the nose stands as a symbol of humanity's enduring quest to protect life in the face of death, to find meaning and strength even when confronted with the most devastating invisible forces. The doctor who prescribed burning sulfur indoors in the midst of plague-ravaged cities. When death stalked every street and hope seemed a distant flicker, physicians sought desperate remedies against the invisible enemy. Among these remedies was the burning of sulfur indoors, a practice born from a profound but flawed understanding of disease. Doctors prescribed lighting fires of sulfur in rooms, convinced that its choking fumes could purge the air of the deadly miasma believed to carry the plague. Yet, this remedy, intended to save lives, often did more harm than good, poisoning the very occupants it sought to protect. To understand why burning sulfur became a medical prescription, we must travel back to the world of pre-modern medicine. The concept of miasma dominated medical thought for centuries, the belief that diseases like the plague were spread through foul, corrupted air. This invisible, poisonous vapor was thought to emanate from decay, filth, and death, infiltrating homes and bodies alike. Physicians were armed only with limited tools and theories, yet they recognized that fresh, clean air was life-saving, while stagnant, foul air invited death. It was within this desperate context that burning sulfur was embraced as a form of air purification. Sulfur, known since antiquity, was a substance long associated with purification and ritual cleansing. Its acrid, suffocating smoke was unmistakable, a pungent cloud that stung the eyes and burned the throat. Early doctors believed that sulfur's fumes could penetrate the thick miasma, neutralizing its deadly properties and creating a barrier. Against infection, houses were fumigated by burning lumps of sulfur, sometimes in enclosed rooms where the sick or vulnerable remained. This practice was widespread in Europe during plague outbreaks, notably in the 14th century and again during the Great Plague of London in the 1660s. Historical medical manuals and contemporary accounts reveal how sulfur was recommended not just for cleansing streets or hospitals, but for indoor use within the very homes of the afflicted. Physicians instructed families to burn sulfur daily or even hourly, believing that the dense fumes would purify the air they breathed. In some cases, sulfur was burned alongside herbs and resins, creating an overwhelming atmosphere of smoke and chemical smell that filled chambers where people huddled, hoping for protection. But this remedy came with grave consequences. The smoke of burning sulfur is chemically reactive, producing sulfur dioxide and other toxic gases that irritate and inflame the respiratory system. For the sick whose lungs were already compromised by infection, inhaling these fumes was often deadly. Many who survived the plague outbreaks may have suffered additional poisoning from these fumigations, coughing fits, choking, and respiratory distress became common side effects. Ironically, a treatment intended to save life often worsened suffering and hastened death. Eyewitness testimonies and medical commentaries of the era lamented these unintended harms. Some physicians began to question the efficacy and safety of sulfur fumigation, but the grip of miasma theory was strong. With no understanding of bacteria, fleas, or contagion as we know them today, doctors were trapped in a cycle of trial, error, and superstition. Burning sulfur was one of many desperate acts performed in smoky rooms thick with the smell of chemicals, despair, and disease. The use of sulfur indoors also speaks to the psychological state of plagueura societies. The fumes, as noxious and suffocating as they were, represented an active battle against death. Families clung to this ritual as a beacon of hope, a visible sign that something was being done to combat the invisible poison. The harsh smell was a constant reminder of the fight within those walls, a chemical guardian against the unseen miasma. Yet, in this smoky war, many became victims, not only of plague, but of the medicine itself. Looking deeper, the burning of sulfur indoors highlights the intersection of science, fear, and misunderstanding in human history. It reminds us of the limits imposed by the knowledge of the time and the lengths to which humanity will go when confronted by helplessness. It was a practice born from logic, grounded in the best theories available, but blind to the hidden dangers. Of the cure, the rooms where sulfur burned were paradoxical spaces, havens of protection and chambers of suffocation, places where hope and harm intertwined. Today, with the clarity of modern science, we understand that the plague was spread primarily by fleas carried by rats, and that bacteria, not poisonous air, was the true culprit. The burning of sulfur, while toxic, could not kill these vectors or the bacterium itself. Yet, the historical practice stands as a poignant testament to the human desire to wield control over chaos, to cleanse and protect in the face of incomprehensible threat. The image of sulfur burning inside dimly lit plagueura rooms is both haunting and symbolic. The thick, choking fumes swirling around wooden beams, curling over stone floors, and invading every corner evoke a suffocating atmosphere where the boundary between cure and poison was dangerously thin. It is a glimpse into a world gripped by terror and the fragile hope offered by the flame and smoke. In the end, the burning sulfur indoors is more than just a medical footnote. It is a story of survival and tragedy, science and superstition, courage, and the unintended consequences of human actions. It reveals the complexity of fighting an invisible enemy with the imperfect weapons of the past, and the enduring human spirit that sought light even when that light burned too fiercely. The town that was ordered to smell nice in the heart of 14th century London, as the Black Death swept mercilessly through the city's crowded alleys and marketplaces, an extraordinary decree echoed through the halls of power. King Edward III, confronted with the terrifying spread of the plague and the desperation of his people, issued a command that might seem strange to modern ears. The city was ordered to smell nice. This royal mandate was no trivial matter. It was born from a profound belief held by medieval society that foul odors were more than unpleasant. They were harbingers of death itself. To comprehend the significance of this decree, we must understand the medieval conception of disease. The people of the time, lacking knowledge of germs or bacteria, believed fervently in the theory of miasma. This theory held that diseases were spread through noxious vapors, miasmas emanating from rotting matter, waste, and filth. Bad smells were not just signs of decay. They were thought to be the very source of infection. A foul stench meant that death lurked nearby, a scent of doom that could seep into the lungs and claim lives. London, a bustling medieval metropolis of narrow streets, open sewers, and overcrowded homes, was rife with the smells of refuse, waste, and decay. The Thames flowed beneath bridges that often served as open dumps, and garbage lay heaped in gutters where stagnant water bred disease. Rats and fleas thrived in this environment, though the connection to plague transmission was unknown. To Edward III and his council, the stench of the city was a visible enemy, one that must be purged to stave off the invisible scourge. The royal order was explicit and sweeping. Streets were to be cleaned rigorously, refuse removed, cesspits emptied, and any source of foul odors eradicated. Householders were commanded to dispose of garbage promptly, and public latrines to be maintained more diligently. Sweepers were appointed to patrol the streets, removing filth and ensuring that the air might once again carry the fragrance of cleanliness and order. But this command was not only practical, it was profoundly symbolic. The cleansing of the city's air represented a battle for the soul and survival of London. If the stench of rot could be vanquished, perhaps the miasma of death could be driven away. People bathed more frequently, burned herbs and incense in their homes, and scattered fragrant substances like juniper and rosemary in the streets. Markets were regulated to prevent the sale of spoiled food, and meat vendors were monitored to avoid rotting goods that might poison the air. The psychological impact of this order cannot be overstated. In a time when death was omnipresent and often inexplicable, the act of cleaning became a form of defiance. Citizens clung to hope that by purifying their environment, they could wrest control from the plague's merciless advance. The removal of foul smells was both a practical attempt at sanitation and a ritual cleansing of evil. Medieval chroniclers documented the efforts with a mixture of reverence and despair. Some noted improvements in morale as the streets were swept and airs sweetened, while others lamented that, despite the efforts, the plague continued its deadly march. Still, the decree marked one of the earliest known public health initiatives, aimed at environmental sanitation, predicated on the best scientific understanding of the day. King Edward III's mandate also reflects the intersection of authority and health. The Crown recognized that controlling the city's cleanliness was a matter of governance and survival. This royal involvement in public health foreshadowed later developments in urban sanitation and epidemiology. Centuries before the germ theory of disease would illuminate the true causes of plague. The order to make London smell nice was more than a quest for pleasantness. It was a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos, to fight an invisible enemy with the weapons they had: knowledge, ritual, and the cleansing power of scent. People's senses became a front line in the battle against death, where the foulness in the air was both feared and fought. Though we now understand that plague was spread by fleas carried on rats and not by stinking air, the spirit of Edward III's order resonates still. It embodies humanity's earliest efforts to understand disease, to adapt, and to survive. The sweeping away of filth, the scattering of fragrant herbs, and the command from the throne to purify the city were acts of courage amid despair. So, when imagining medieval London, the narrow lanes thick with smoke and the stench of refuse, remember the moment when a king decreed that the air must be sweetened, that the foul odors must vanish. This was not mere vanity or superstition. It was a profound expression of hope, an attempt to cleanse not just the streets, but the very breath of life itself. In the scent of burning herbs, in the swept streets, and in the emptied scent, echoes the human will to fight back against death with every means known. The town ordered to smell nice stands as a testament to resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the desire to breathe freely and live was powerful enough to command kings and commoners alike. The flower petals spread over corpses during the relentless waves of plague that swept through Europe. Death was a constant companion, and the air itself seemed heavy with despair and decay. The streets and homes of afflicted towns were often filled with the stench of death-rotting flesh, soiled linens, and the foul odors of sickness that clung to every surface. In these grim moments, people turned to the beauty of flowers, specifically rose petals, as a desperate attempt to mask the unbearable smell and bring some semblance of dignity and relief to the fallen. It was a widespread practice to scatter rose petals over the corpses of plague victims. This act was not merely decorative. It was an attempt to sweeten the air, to replace the putrid odors of death with the delicate, fragrant aroma of roses. These petals, delicate and vibrant, were thought to purify the atmosphere, to chase away the poisonous miasma believed to cause the disease. To the grieving and terrified communities, the petals were a fragile shield against the invisible poison hanging in the air, but beneath the surface of this ritual lay a tragic irony. The plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis and transmitted primarily through fleas on rats, was not stopped or slowed by flower petals. The sweet scent of roses was powerless against the true vectors of disease. Yet the ritual endured, fueled by hope, fear, and the human yearning to find control amid chaos. The use of rose petals was steeped in symbolic meaning as well. Roses were long associated with purity, love, and life. Their fragrance was believed to have healing properties, to soothe the soul and bring comfort to the dying and the dead. In a world where death was sudden, cruel, and incomprehensible, the petals offered a final act of care, a moment of beauty amid devastation. Descriptions from period accounts reveal streets and burial sites carpeted in these petals, a vivid contrast between life and death. The bright reds, pinks, and whites of rose petals softened the harshness of plague graves and funerary pyres. They were a balm for the living as much as the dead a sensory escape from the relentless odor of decay that marked plague-ridden places. Medical theory at the time, dominated by the miasma theory, held that foul smells carried disease through the air. People believed that if the air could be purified, if the stench could be replaced with something sweet and floral, then infection could be prevented. Rose petals, with their strong and pleasant aroma, fit perfectly into this belief system. They were not only beautiful, but functional in the mind of the medieval healer and mourner alike. Beyond the immediate sensory relief, the petals carried ritualistic significance. Their scattering was part of funerary rites, a gesture of respect to the dead and a plea for protection from the living. In some regions, the petals were combined with other fragrant herbs and spices, creating elaborate mixtures intended to cleanse the air and spirit. Yet, despite the comfort they offered, rose petals were ultimately powerless against the plague's deadly advance. The real cause of infection fleas biting humans after feeding on infected rats was invisible and unrecognized. The petals masked no vectors. They changed no outcomes. Still, their use persisted, a testament to human resilience and the desperate attempts to find meaning and defense where little existed. Today, the image of rose petals strewn over plague victims stands as a poignant symbol. It reminds us of the limits of knowledge, the clash between hope and reality, and the ways in which people sought light in their darkest hours. The petals spoke of love, fear, and the yearning for protection, or delicate, fragrant gesture against a brutal and unseen killer. In that act, the petals became more than just flower parts. They were a human response to the unimaginable, a fragile attempt to reclaim dignity, and a haunting echo of lives lost beneath the sweet, futile scent of roses. The mask made of crushed crystals in the labyrinthine canals and grand palaces of Renaissance Venice, a city of splendor and shadows. A silent battle raged not only in the streets, but upon the very faces of its nobles. Venice was a jewel of wealth and culture, a crossroads of East and West, where trade brought not only riches, but also terrifying plagues that swept through the crowded city like wildfire. In this era of opulence haunted by invisible death, the Venetian elite turned to an extraordinary and mysterious form of protection. Masks lined with crushed crystals and infused with musk, believed to wield mystical power to neutralize the deadly air itself. The idea that air could be deadly was not new. The miasma theory, the belief that foul, corrupted air spread disease, was the dominant medical doctrine throughout medieval and Renaissance Europe. But Venice, with its unique geography of canals, humid fog, and bustling markets, developed a particular obsession with the purity of the breath. Nobles and merchants alike feared that each inhale might carry the plague's fatal touch. To combat this, Venetian mask makers and alchemists collaborated in a secretive craft. These masks were no mere coverings for masquerade balls. They were elaborate talismans designed to serve as airborne shields. Inside the mask's lining, artisans ground precious gemstones, amethyst, quartz, and even crushed pearls into fine powders. These crystalline minerals were believed to contain inherent energetic properties, capable of cleansing and purifying corrupted air. The stones, associated with spiritual protection and healing, were thought to neutralize toxins on a mystical level, aligning with the Renaissance fascination with the occult, alchemy, and natural philosophy. Complementing the crystalline lining was musk, an intense, earthy, and animalistic scent extracted from the musk deer. Musk was treasured across Europe and Asia as a potent fragrance and medicine. It was thought to possess antiseptic qualities, capable of masking foul odors and driving away evil spirits. When combined with crushed crystals, musk lent the mask a dual purpose: physical protection through aroma and spiritual defense through mineral energy. These masks were often crafted from leather or fine fabric, richly decorated to display the wearer's status. But their true power was hidden within a secret fusion of science, superstition, and symbolism. Nobles would press the mask tightly to their faces, inhaling through the crystal and musk-infused lining, confident that this barrier would shield them from the plague's unseen menace. This practice was as much about psychological reassurance as physical defense in a city where the dead were carted away nightly, where the living whispered prayers for mercy. The mask became a symbol of control in a world spinning out of control. It was an emblem of status, knowledge, and hope, a statement that the wearer was prepared to meet death with dignity and defiance. Historical documents and portraits reveal glimpses of these masks, their ornate designs preserved in paintings, and written descriptions. They bridge the worlds of art and medicine, reflecting Renaissance Venice's unique blend of mysticism, commerce, and desperation. Yet beneath this glittering surface lies the tragic irony. The crushed crystals and musk, no matter how precious, offered no real defense against the plague's bacterial agents carried by fleas on rats. The true cause of the disease remained hidden for centuries. The masks were a symbolic shield, a comfort against fear, but not a cure. Still, the story of the Venetian crystalline mask speaks to a universal human truth: the desire to protect oneself through knowledge, ritual, and beauty. It is a testament to creativity in the face of catastrophe, where science and superstition intertwined. Today, as masks once again cover faces worldwide, the Venetian mask, lined with crushed crystals, reminds us of the enduring human quest to find safety and meaning amidst invisible threats. It whispers of a time when hope was crushed into powder and breathed in a glittering defense against the darkness. The tavern that used pine smoke to stay open in the heart of plague-ridden France, amid streets shadowed by death and despair. There stood a peculiar tavern that dared to defy the grim fate surrounding it. This tavern, known simply by locals as the Pine Smoke Inn, gained a reputation both curious and hopeful. It claimed to be a haven of safety, a plague-free sanctuary in a world falling apart. How did it achieve such a remarkable feat? Through a constant haze of thick, aromatic smoke pines, smoke burned ceaselessly within its walls. During the relentless waves of the Black Death and subsequent outbreaks, people sought any refuge from the invisible menace that seemed to lurk everywhere. At a time when medical understanding was rudimentary and the concept of contagion was misunderstood or unknown, this tavern's practice was revolutionary in its simplicity and boldness. Pine wood was burned continuously, filling the taverns rooms and air with a dense resinous smoke that hung heavy over every table, every barrel, every glass of wine and ale. The choice of pine was no accident. Pine wood, rich with natural resins and aromatic compounds, was believed to possess powerful purifying qualities. The fragrant smoke was thought to cleanse the air, driving away the miasma or corrupted vapors that medieval medicine held responsible for spreading plague and sickness. In an age when disease was believed to travel on bad smells carried by the wind, the constant burning of pine offered a protective veil shield woven from smoke and scent. Historical records from this period describe similar uses of incense, herbs, and wood smoke in homes and public spaces as desperate attempts to disinfect and protect. Yet, the Pine Smoke Inn's relentless burning was unique in scale and consistency, transforming the tavern into a place where the air itself became a weapon against death. The patrons who frequented this smoky haven were willing to endure eyes watering, the throat burning, the clothes scented with pine resin, because the alternative was far worse. Inhaling the thick smoke was a small price to pay for a chance at survival. The tavern's reputation spread, drawing those desperate for a reprieve from quarantine and isolation, who found temporary solace under the canopy of pine smoke. Modern science reveals that pine smoke contains compounds with antimicrobial properties. Phenols and terpenes found in pine resin can inhibit bacteria and fungi. While it would not have stopped the flea bites that transmitted plague bacteria, the smoke might have reduced airborne pathogens or insect presence indoors. Moreover, the smoke's density likely deterred insects and may have masked odors that attracted rats and fleas, inadvertently lowering the risk of infection. The psychological impact of the smoke cannot be underestimated. In a time rife with fear, the presence of a tangible, visible defense offered reassurance. The thick pine haze symbolized an active battle against the plague, a ritual of purification and protection. Patrons were not passive victims, but participants in a communal act of defiance, sharing drinks and stories. Under a smoky shield, bound by hope and courage, yet the story of the Pine Smoke Inn is also a story of human ingenuity, confronting ignorance. The tavern's owners harnessed natural resources and folk wisdom to create a space where life could persist amidst death. Their practice blurred the line between medicine and magic, science and superstition, illustrating how communities adapted to unseen threats with whatever means they had. This tale also highlights how sensory experience shaped medieval responses to plague. The sense of smell, in particular, was linked to health and illness. Bad odors were feared as carriers of disease, while pleasant or strong smells were sought. As purifiers, the pine smoke, pungent and persistent, filled that role perfectly. It was an olfactory barrier, a cloud of protection woven from nature's own materials. As we reflect on the pine smoke in centuries later, we see more than a quaint anecdote. We witness a profound human story, a story of survival, adaptation, and the quest for safety in the face of incomprehensible horror. The tavern that used pine smoke to stay open embodies the spirit of resilience and the timeless desire to find light and life even when engulfed by darkness. So the next time you imagine medieval Europe under siege by plague, picture that smoky tavern glowing hearth, a haze of pine-scented smoke swirling through wooden beams, and people raising their cups in quiet defiance, breathing hope amid the thick air. The merchant who washed coins in perfume in the shadow of plague's relentless spread, fear seeped into every corner of daily life, infecting not just the air but the very objects exchanged between hands. Among these objects, coins took on a sinister new role. Far beyond mere currency, money became a feared vector, a tangible symbol of contamination and death. Traders and merchants, desperate to protect themselves from the invisible threat, adopted a strange but telling ritual, washing their coins in perfume, especially rosewater. This act was more than hygiene, it was a psychological shield, a costly sacrifice of silver to reclaim peace of mind amid chaos. To understand this peculiar practice, we must first glimpse the fraught relationship medieval and early modern societies had with currency during epidemics. Money was handled by many hands, passing from buyer to seller, from town to town. And in the crowded markets where disease thrived unseen, coins often grimy, worn, and passed through countless palms were believed to carry the miasma, the poisonous air or spirit, thought to spread plague. Every coin was a potential poison, a tiny death waiting to leap from metal to flesh. Fear of contagion turned money into a curse, forcing merchants to devise new ways to protect themselves. Rosewater, distilled from fragrant roses, was widely prized not only for its delicate scent, but also for its supposed medicinal and purifying properties. It was a luxury, an essence extracted with care, often used in cosmetics, medicine, and religious rites. Its sweet aroma was believed to cleanse, to soothe the senses assaulted by the odors of disease and decay. When soaked in rosewater, coins were thought to be purged of their deadly taint, their surface cleansed of the invisible poison that might linger on the metal. This was a symbolic act, a physical barrier against the miasma, performed with ritual care. Historical accounts tell of merchants in plague-affected cities, particularly in Europe's bustling trading hubs, who took to bathing their coins in fragrant baths before accepting them. This practice was not without cost. Silver coins soaked repeatedly in rosewater lost some of their shine and value, a tangible sacrifice made for the sake of health and sanity. Yet for many, this loss was small compared to the terrifying risk of infection. The ritual of washing money became a daily necessity, a small ritual of control amid overwhelming uncertainty. The psychology behind this practice runs deep. The plague was invisible, unpredictable, and merciless. Every interaction was shadowed by the fear that a single touch might bring death. Washing coins was an act of defiance, a way to reclaim agency in a world turned upside down. It transformed a mundane transaction into a moment of ritual purification, a brief, fragrant shield against the encroaching dread. The scent of roses was a balm for the spirit as much as for the body, a fleeting reminder of beauty amid decay. Yet this practice also underscores the broader societal impact of the plague on commerce and trust. Markets slowed, goods were inspected with suspicion, and monetary exchange became fraught with anxiety. The washing of coins was a sign of how deeply the epidemic had penetrated social and economic life, disrupting the very mechanisms of trade and human connection. It reveals a world where survival demanded vigilance, not only against the disease itself but against the everyday objects that carried it. This ritual also reflects the limits of medical knowledge at the time. Without understanding germs or bacterial transmission, people relied on sensory clues and symbolic actions. The sweet scent of rosewater offered comfort, but did not kill plague bacteria. However, it did mask foul odors and may have reduced some surface contaminants, providing a small measure of practical benefit alongside its psychological reassurance. The act of washing money was a blend of superstition, practical hygiene, and deep-seated fire, a testament to the desperate creativity born from crisis. The image of merchants carefully dipping coins into bowls of perfumed water, watching as silver shimmered beneath the rose-scented liquid, captures a moment frozen between commerce and catastrophe. It is a scene of quiet determination, of attempt to hold on to normalcy while the world around them crumbled. This act, small yet profound, is a window into the human response to fear and the search for control in the face of death. Looking back, the merchant who washed coins in perfume stands as a symbol of resilience and vulnerability. It is a reminder that even in the darkest times, people sought ways to protect themselves, to preserve their livelihoods and their lives. The scent of rosewater, drifting faintly through the markets, tells a story of fear transformed into ritual, loss embraced as protection, and the enduring hope that even the smallest acts could keep the plague's invisible poison at bay. The vinegar wall that blocked the wind in the quiet. Cloistered walls of medieval monasteries, where prayer and contemplation sought to shield souls from the ravages of the world. A curious and haunting practice took hold during times of plague and pestilence. Monks, bound by faith and a desperate hope for protection, hung cloths soaked in vinegar along their windows and doors, creating what came to be known as the vinegar wall. This simple yet profound barrier was believed to filter the very air itself, an invisible shield against the divine punishment carried on the wind. To grasp the significance of the vinegar wall, we must enter the medieval mind, a world where disease was as much spiritual as physical. The Black Death and recurring plagues were understood, not merely as sickness, but as God's wrath, a divine scourge sent to punish humanity's sins. The air that swept through towns and monasteries alike was thought to be laden with miasma, poisonous vapors infused with corruption, decay, and spiritual contagion. To breathe this air was to invite death and divine judgment. Vinegar, with its sharp, acidic bite and pungent aroma, was more than a common household item. It was a powerful symbol of purification and cleansing, known since antiquity for its antiseptic properties and ability to preserve. Vinegar was believed to purify not just physical surfaces, but the very essence of the air that passed through it. Monks soaked cloths in vinegar, then draped or hung these fragrant fabrics across doorways and windows, hoping to neutralize the poisonous miasma before it could invade their sacred sanctuaries. This practice was rooted in a blend of faith, empirical observation, and the limited medical knowledge of the time. Vinegar's strong smell was thought to overpower the foul stenches of decay that signaled the presence of the plague. By intercepting the wind and filtering it through vinegar-soaked cloths, monks believed they could create a boundary between the sacred and the profane, between life and death. Historical accounts describe how these vinegar walls became an essential part of monastic plague protocols. Monks, who often tended to the sick and administered last rites, sought every means to protect themselves. Their monasteries, secluded, yet vulnerable, became battlegrounds where faith met fear, and every scent, every breath, was laden with meaning. The vinegar wall was a tangible expression of their hope, a barrier, woven from both spiritual conviction and practical necessity. The use of vinegar in this way also intersected with broader medieval health theories. Vinegar was recognized for its cleansing effects on wounds and surfaces, and its acidity discouraged the growth of certain bacteria and fungi, though the microscopic cause of plague remained unknown. While it could not stop the plague bacteria, transmitted by fleas, vinegar's role as a disinfectant and purifier lent credence to its use as an air filter in the eyes of those desperate to survive. Beyond the physical and medical, the vinegar wall embodied a profound spiritual symbolism. It was an act of consecration, a ritual purification of the very air entering a holy place. The monks' prayers and rituals imbued the vinegar cloths with sacred protection, transforming a simple household substance into a mystical barrier against divine wrath. This practice illustrates the medieval fusion of religion, medicine, and everyday life. It reveals how communities sought to interpret and combat a terrifying reality with the tools and beliefs available to them. The vinegar wall was at once practical and symbolic, a reflection of humanity's struggle to find order and safety in a world ravaged by unseen forces. Today, we understand that airborne transmission of plague was minimal compared to flea bites and rodents, and that impact on air purification was limited. Yet, the ingenuity and faith behind the vinegar wall remain powerful testaments to resilience. In those vinegar-soaked cloths hung across monastery doors, we see a story of courage, a quiet defiance against death, wrapped in scent and prayer. So, when you picture a medieval monastery silent, stone-walled candlelit, also the faint, sharp tang of vinegar hanging in the air, that scent was more than odor. It was a shield, a prayer, and a plea for protection against a world. On the brink of collapse, the vinegar wall stood firm, not just against the wind, but against despair itself. The belief that bells could break the air as the specter of plague loomed over medieval and Renaissance Europe. Entire communities clung to rituals rooted in faith and desperate hope. Among these, the relentless ringing of church bells echoed ceaselessly through towns and villages, a sound believed not merely to mark time or call the faithful to prayer, but to perform a sacred and practical duty, to shatter the poisonous air itself, to break the invisible chains of disease, and to drive sickness away with the power of holy sound. In a world where medical understanding was limited and terrifying illness moved unseen, people sought refuge in what they could grasp: faith, ritual, and the tangible force of sound. The plague was thought to spread through miasma noxious, bad air that carried pestilence like a poison drifting on the wind. If foul smells and corrupted air caused the sickness, then it followed that the right sound might disrupt and dispel this invisible danger. Church bells, loud and resonant, became a weapon in this spiritual and physical battle. From dawn until dusk, and often through the restless night's bells, tolled continuously, their sonorous peals ringing out across the empty streets and over the graves of the fallen. The ringing was not random but ordered, specific tolls marked. Hours called for prayer and sounded warnings. But beneath these functions was a profound belief in the sound's power to cleanse. The sound waves were thought to literally break or shatter the miasma, scattering the poisonous air and preventing it from settling in the lungs of the living. Some contemporaries believed the vibrations of the bells disturbed the very fabric of the air, banishing the invisible plague particles like a storm scattering smoke. Others saw the bells as a call to the divine, an audible prayer piercing the heavens to summon protection and mercy. Accounts from plague years describe the haunting soundscape of cities filled with bells tolling non-stop. The clangor rose above, the screams and moans of the sick above the solemn footsteps of burial parties, and above the whispered prayers of the fearful. The ringing was a constant companion, a rhythm of resistance against death itself. Church leaders played a central role in this practice. Clergy organized bell-ringing schedules and encouraged the populace to join in prayer, reinforcing the idea that sound and faith together could shield the community. Bells were seen as instruments of God's power on earth, their voices sanctified and potent. The ringing also served practical purposes during plague times, signaling the times for prayer, marking curfews, and announcing deaths and funerals. But the spiritual belief in the bell's protective capacity infused every peal with urgency and hope. To hear the bells was to feel that, even amid devastation, there was still a line of defense, a sacred force standing guard. Interestingly, some areas even developed specialized plague bell tolls, distinctive rhythms, meant specifically to ward off disease or accompany processions carrying the sick and dead. The sound was a form of communication and protection, a sonic barrier between life and death. Modern science, of course, understands that sound waves cannot destroy bacteria or prevent flea-borne transmission of plague. Yet the medieval and early modern reliance on bells was not mere superstition, it was a profound expression of the human need to act and to believe. In a time when death was sudden, invisible, and unstoppable, the ringing bells created order from chaos, hope from despair. The belief in the power of bells also reflected the deep intertwining of religion and daily life. The church was the heart of the community, and its bells were its voice. To ring the bells was to call upon divine mercy and to assert that no matter how dark the night, the light of faith and sound would not be silenced. As the centuries passed and medical knowledge evolved, the ceaseless tolling of plague bells faded into history. But the image of bells ringing through fog-shrouded streets, their echoing sound striving to break the poisoned air, remains a haunting symbol of resilience and faith amid catastrophe. These bells were more than metal and rope. They were the voice of a community refusing to surrender, a sacred soundscape of survival, and a desperate plea to a higher power to keep death at bay. They remind us that in the darkest times, humans reach for both science and spirit, for ritual and reason. In the eternal struggle against disease and despair, the fragrant prayer beads that served two purposes in the quiet. Shadowed cloisters of medieval monasteries where stone walls absorbed centuries of whispered prayers. Monks sought to weave together the spiritual and the tangible in their daily rituals. Among their most intimate companions were prayer beads, simple strings of beads held in the hands, counted with devotion to mark the rhythm of faith. Yet these beads were more than mere tools of meditation. In an era gripped by plague and fear, they were subtly transformed into instruments of protection, imbued with fragrance to cleanse both soul and air. The tradition of prayer beads stretches far back, crossing cultures and religions. For Christian monks in medieval Europe, rosaries and other bead strings provided a tactile means to focus the mind on sacred mysteries, to anchor themselves amidst the turmoil of the world. But during the Black Death and subsequent outbreaks, these beads took on an added layer of purpose. Monks began perfuming their beads with aromatic oils and herbs, lavender, rosemary, frankincense, myrrh, believing that inhaling their scent would not only calm the spirit, but also protect the body from the corrupt air around them. The miasma theory of disease dominated medical thought at the time. It was widely believed that plague and sickness traveled on poisonous vapors, bad air that corrupted the breath and invaded the body. Sweet, pungent scents were thought to purify this air, forming invisible barriers against disease. By perfuming their prayer beads, monks created a portable sanctuary of fragrance they could carry with them into the sick wards, the chapels, and the world beyond monastery walls. These scented beads served two powerful functions. First, they enhanced spiritual focus. The calming aromas helped to steady anxious minds, soothe troubled hearts, and deepen the meditative state. Frankincense and myrrh, for example, were sacred resins long associated with divine presence and worship, their smoky, warm fragrances evoking mystery and reverence. Second, they acted as a physical defense, a subtle but constant shield against the pestilent miasma that cloaked the cities and countrysides. Perfuming prayer beads was a delicate art. Monks or apothecaries would soak the beads crafted from wood, bone, or precious stones in oils infused with carefully chosen herbs and resins. The scent would linger, releasing faint waves of protective fragrance with every breath and every movement. For the wearer, the beads became a sacred talisman, a meeting point between faith and survival. Historical records describe monks and religious orders who carried such beads during their ministrations, moving through plague-ridden areas with quiet courage. The beads were more than symbols of devotion, they were tools of resilience, blending the seen and unseen, the spiritual and the corporeal. This dual purpose of the perfumed prayer beads reveals much about medieval life and belief. In times when medical knowledge was limited and death was ever present, Faith and science were not separate realms, but intertwined pathways toward hope and protection. The scent was a bridge, linking the physical world with the spiritual, the earthly danger with divine grace. Moreover, these beads remind us of the profound human need for sensory anchors in moments of fear. When disease threatened to overwhelm the familiar weight of beads in the hand, the gentle fragrance wafting through the air became a source of comfort and strength. The ritual of prayer itself was heightened by the aromatic presence, transforming anxiety into peace, vulnerability into quiet power. Though modern science has since revealed the true nature of disease transmission, the story of the perfumed prayer beads stands as a poignant testament to human ingenuity and faith. It captures an era's desperation and hope, showing how people sought to reclaim agency amid the chaos. In today's world, where rituals of mindfulness and aromatherapy intersect, the legacy of these fragrant beads endures. They remind us that healing is often a blend of the physical and spiritual, the practical and poetic. So when you imagine those monks in their cloisters, quietly counting their beads, inhaling the sacred scent, know that their prayer was more than words. It was a fragrant shield, a prayer both whispered and breathed, standing between life and death in a time when every breath counted. The chicken tied to the armpit as a cure in the grim and fearful world of medieval medicine, where knowledge was limited and disease often misunderstood. Desperate measures were sometimes taken in the hope of curing the incurable. Bizarre and haunting practice involved tying a live chicken under the patient's armpit. Methods some physicians believed could draw out the bad air or corrupted vapors thought to be poisoning the body during plague or other illnesses. This strange remedy reflects the era's blending of superstition, early medical theory, and an urgent quest for survival, often at a tragic cost. To fully grasp this practice, it is essential to understand the prevailing medical beliefs of the time. The miasma theory dominated disease, was believed to spread through foul, noxious air, and sickness resulted from the body being contaminated by these invisible, poisonous vapors. Healing, therefore, meant removing or absorbing this bad air. From the patient, various methods were devised to achieve this, from fumigations and herbal remedies to physical rituals aimed at purifying the afflicted body. The chicken, a common domestic animal, became an unlikely vessel in this medical drama. Physicians posited that a live chicken, placed snugly under the armpit, would act like a sponge, absorbing the corrupted air emanating from the patient's body. The warmth of the armpit was believed to draw the illness out, and the chicken's living presence was thought to attract and take on the harmful essence, sparing the human host. This belief, while baffling to modern sensibilities, was grounded in the symbolic and practical logic of the time. Animals were often seen as connected to the human body and spirit, capable of absorbing harm or carrying away disease. Similar practices existed in various folk medicines where animals or objects were used as scapegoats to transfer illness away from the person. Yet, the reality of this treatment was grim. Many times, both patient and chicken succumbed. The chicken, exposed to the patient's disease and bodily emissions, often died, a silent sacrifice bearing the invisible burden of sickness. The patient, however, frequently did not recover. This tragic outcome underscores the limitations and dangers of medical knowledge in the pre-modern era. Despite its ineffectiveness, the chicken under the arm remedy provides a vivid window into medieval desperation. It highlights how, in the absence of effective treatments, people turned to any method that promised hope no matter how strange or futile. The chicken was a living talisman, a symbol of transfer and sacrifice, embodying the hope that sickness could be wrested away, even at great cost. Historical accounts and medical treatises from the period mention such practices alongside other methods of combating plague and fever. They reflect an age where medicine, magic, and religion were deeply intertwined, and where healing was as much about belief and ritual as about tangible cures. The chicken's role in this somber tableau is a reminder of how human beings have long sought meaning and agency in the face of overwhelming disease. Moreover, this practice speaks to a broader cultural context in which animals were seen as participants in human health and misfortune. The boundary between human and animal was more porous, and animals were often enlisted in healing rituals, divination, and protection. The chicken's fate under the arm thus symbolizes a tragic partnership in suffering, a shared burden of illness that crossed species lines. Reflecting on this practice today, we see more than an odd medieval curiosity. We see a profound testament to human vulnerability and the relentless pursuit of life. The image of a patient clutching a live chicken beneath the arm, hoping to transfer their poison away, is a haunting emblem of an era struggling to understand the invisible forces that claimed millions. It also invites us to consider how far medical science has come and how crucial the journey from superstition to evidence has been. Yet, beneath the layers of knowledge and progress lies the timeless human story of fear, hope, sacrifice, and the quest to heal against all odds. So when you think of medieval medicine, remember the chicken tied to the armpit. It is a story of tragic faith, desperate remedies, and the fragile line between life and death, drawn in the flickering light of history's darkest days. The perfume recipe that claimed to cure the plague in the dark days when the plague ravaged Europe, fear was a constant companion, and hope was a fragile flicker. Amidst the chaos and despair, stories of miraculous remedies spread like wildfire. One of the most fascinating of these was the so-called Queen of Hungary water. This potent herbal concoction, a fragrant and mysterious perfume, was embraced not only as a scent of elegance, but as a powerful talisman against the invisible menace of plague. People believed that bathing in it, or even drinking it, could ward off disease and keep them safe from death's cruel grasp. Queen of Hungary water, or Aqua Reginae, Hungaria, traces its origins back to the 14th century. Credited to Elizabeth of Hungary, a noblewoman renowned for her piety and charitable acts. According to legend, she crafted this herbal distillate to preserve her youth and health. A blend of distilled alcohol infused with rosemary, lavender, thyme, and other fragrant botanicals. Over time, this aromatic water transcended its noble origins, becoming a coveted elixir, part perfume, part medicine, promising protection in an era when fear of plague gripped every household. The recipe itself was a complex alchemy of nature's most potent scents. Rosemary was prized for its believed ability to purify the air and stimulate the mind. Lavender was thought to soothe fever and calm the nerves. Thyme held antiseptic properties, while other herbs added layers of fragrance and purported healing power. Distilled in alcohol, these ingredients combined to create a sharp, penetrating aroma that filled rooms with a scent both refreshing and forbidding. Its powerful smell was believed to cleanse the miasma of poisonous vapors, thought to carry disease, offering a shield against contagion. People of all classes clung to this hope. The wealthy war queen of Hungary water as perfume, an aromatic armor against the plague that lurked in the crowded streets. Some bathed in diluted versions of the water, immersing themselves in its fragrant embrace, believing it cleansed not just the skin, but the very soul. Others took the remedy internally, drinking small amounts as a medicine, convinced it could fortify the body's defenses and stave off illness. In the absence of effective treatments, the water became a symbol of hupa, fragrant barrier against the unknown. Historical records reveal how widely this water was circulated, especially during plague outbreaks in cities like Venice, Paris, and London. Apothecaries sold it alongside other herbal concoctions, and physicians recommended it as part of plague prevention regimens. The water was sometimes combined with rosewater or other floral scents, enhancing its perceived potency. Its popularity endured for centuries, long after the initial outbreaks, becoming woven into the cultural fabric of Europe's response to disease and death. Yet the story of Queen of Hungary water also reveals the fragile intersection between science and superstition. While some herbs in the mixture do possess mild antiseptic qualities, the water itself could not prevent or cure plague. Its alcohol gas might have killed some surface bacteria, but it was no match for Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that caused the devastating illness. Nevertheless, the ritual of using this aromatic water provided comfort and a sense of control to terrified populations, a balm for both body and mind. The cultural impact of Queen of Hungary water is profound. It shaped ideas about hygiene, medicine, and beauty, blurring the lines between perfume and cure. It inspired countless imitations and became a staple in the apothecary's arsenal. The water's legacy extended far beyond the plague years, influencing the development of modern perfumes and aromatherapy. It stands as a testament to humanity's enduring quest for protection through nature's gifts, even in the face of overwhelming mortality. Imagining the scene in a plague-ridden city, the sharp scent of Queen of Hungary water would cut through, the heavy, sickly air mingling with smoke and the cries of the afflicted. People desperate for relief clung to the hope it offered, bathing in its fragrant vapor, dabbing it behind their ears, or sipping it as medicine. This water, at once a luxury and a lifeline, symbolized the fragile hope that the invisible poison might be held at bay by the simple power of scent. In the end, Queen of Hungary water reflects a timeless truth about human resilience. In the face of fear and the unknown, we reach for rituals that restore a sense of agency. It is a story of hope distilled into liquid form, a fragrant weapon, wielded in a desperate battle against death. Though it could not cure the plague, its legacy lingers as a reminder of how scent, science, and superstition intertwine in our attempts to confront the most terrifying threats.